your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Thanks for joining us for our Week in Review. I'm Naveen Day. Albertans living with diabetes may breathe a sigh of relief. The province has cancelled a proposed change it was going to make to its insulin pump therapy program. Earlier this year, the government of Alberta had made shifts to how insulin pump benefits are provided to Albertans living with diabetes. Health Minister Jason Copping says diabetics will now have access to newer pump models, and coverage will continue to be provided for glucose monitors to children and youth through the province.
I recognize we did not approach this in the best way possible, and I have subsequently stopped this change. I also made a commitment to consult with Albertans who use insulin pumps, to hear their concerns, and to determine how best to move forward. To be clear, there will be no changes to the current program. In fact, we are adding to the list of covered products.
The provincial government announced that more than $58.7 million will be spent to support 78 road, bridge, community airport, and water infrastructure projects across Alberta. Officials say the projects will improve water and wastewater services along with access to clean drinking water for rural communities. The projects are also anticipated to create more than 800 jobs during construction. Minister of Transportation Prasad Panda says the initiative will also provide just over $27 million in grants for municipalities.
And the total cost of all these projects is actually more than $184 million. The Water for Life program supports critical clean water supply for residents in smaller communities and regional projects across rural Alberta. Projects receiving funding include a raw water supply pipeline right here in Foothills County and Okotoks. The pipeline will provide reliable access to clean drinking water and support future growth, both in important industries and homes in the region.
It seems as though more and more of our paychecks are going into our gas tanks. The cost of filling up our cars rose more than 50% in June compared with a year ago. Carbon taxes and fuel prices are partly to blame for inflation skyrocketing to 8.1% last month. Stats Canada says that is up from 7.7% in May and marks the largest yearly change since 1983. The Bank of Canada says it is hoping to cool inflation by hiking its key interest rate by a full percentage point in its next rate decision. Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley says with the high cost of inflation, Albertans have less and less buying power each month. She says decisions made by the Kenney government over the past 24 months have made matters worse for so many families.
So the bottom line is this. Today we are calling on the UCP to take this problem seriously, to reconvene the legislature and undo the hurtful policies that they have put in place that are making life so difficult for Alberta families. We would be happy to work with them on it. We hear one or two of their leadership candidates are even finally, after pretending that these policies were good policies, are now themselves running on reversing them. So if they're serious about it, they will join our call to come back to the legislature and actually make the changes that will ensure that Alberta families have a little bit more in their pocket.
Alberta Finance Minister Jason Nixon said the province has done more to address inflation than any other jurisdiction in the country. He is quoted as saying, with over $2 billion in relief measures going to Albertans in the last 3 months, end quote. According to Nixon, Albertans do pay the lowest personal income taxes in the country. To help with inflation, the Alberta government has suspended the provincial gas tax and is set to provide electricity and natural gas rebates in the coming months. It is not only the Alberta NDP that seem to be using the high inflation to prep for the next election. The federal Conservative Party's interim leader, Candice Bergen, says life continues to get worse for Canadians as inflation continues to soar. Bergen lays the blame for the massive inflation we are experiencing squarely at the feet of the Liberal caucus and their current policies.
Speaker, Canadians are suffering with record high inflation, and it's clear these Liberals have no plan to deal with it responsibly, except more of the same mismanagement that got us here in the first place, out of control spending. Even financial institutions like Scotiabank have warned that their continued spending drives higher inflation. You can't spend inflation away. Isn't it true, Mr. Speaker, life is continuing to get worse, not better for Canadians under these Liberals, and they have no idea how to deal with it?
After the break, we hear from Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas on the government policies which have the potential to decrease Canadian farm crop production and further limits on Alberta oil and gas. Welcome back. Earlier this week, Jeanette Roche and Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas discussed the possibility of the farming restrictions being proposed in Holland coming to Canada as well. Have a look.
One thing that we should be paying attention to is the farmers' protest in Holland, as their government net zero climate policy will arbitrarily begin to shut down farmers. So, two questions then, Rachel. Would such a protest actually be allowed here in Canada? And will our farmers, as well as our oil and gas companies, soon be facing similar policies?
Yeah, again, it's an interesting question, and I feel for our farmers because they are definitely in some hard times right now, and I think they have many questions in terms of where we're going as a country, where the Prime Minister is taking us. You know, in the fall, he made a decision. The Prime Minister made a decision that Canada would reduce its fertilizer emissions by 30% by 2030. And he made this commitment without consulting with producers, farmers, or industry stakeholders, and really understanding the issues. And so I think that left farmers feeling voiceless, perhaps even powerless.
So, Rachel, what needs to happen in order to open doors to export Canadian oil and natural gas to places that desperately need them overseas, like Germany, for example?
Bottom line, you know, Canada has the resources that these Eastern European countries need, that these European countries need, that the world needs. We have it. But we unfortunately have a government that is just unwilling to develop the industry. So ultimately, what I would say is, you know, we need political will. We need leaders who see the amazing opportunity that exists to develop the oil and gas industry and to be the answer to so many places around the globe. You know, further to that, I would like to highlight that Canada has the greatest environmental standards in the world when it comes to oil and gas. In addition to that, we have incredible ethical standards and we have incredible human rights standards. We treat people with dignity and respect and provide them with high-paying jobs. When countries like Germany are not provided with a resource from us, oil and gas from us, they will have to turn to places like Saudi Arabia or Venezuela. And I can assure you that they do not have the same environmental standards. They do not have the same human rights track record. They do not have the same high-paying jobs. They do not have the same ethical standards that we have in Canada. And so if we truly do believe in making a difference for the environment, in making a difference for people, then we should be developing this industry. And the way that we do that is by building pipelines.
Mm-hmm. Okay, switching gears here, Rachel, what's the latest on Bill C-11, the internet censorship bill, of course, as it's known, and this could, of course, limit what everyday Canadians can see, hear, or say online?
Again, I really appreciate the question. Bill C-11, you know, I've invested a lot of time and energy into this piece of legislation and understanding it and fighting on behalf of Canadians and their freedom within the internet sphere. You know, ultimately, Bill C-11 is a piece of government legislation that will dictate to Canadians what they can see, hear, and post online. It's dangerous. It's dangerous because we treat the internet as a new public square, if you will. It's a place where the exchange of ideas takes place, and we expect that to be able to take place in a free and democratic way. Now the government is saying, well, actually, wait a minute, we'd like to have a say in terms of how ideas are rolled out there and what's acceptable and what's not, and, you know, what gets to be, you know, seen on the first page of a Google search versus what has to be pushed back to page 453. We want to determine as the government, you know, what Canadians should or should not view. And so I think that's a really dangerous place. And many experts have come forward and said this puts us down a very, slippery slope toward becoming like they have listed North Korea or China or Turkey, where people's speech is not free. It's actually very much controlled by the government. And so again, there are many experts that have come forward and warned of these things. All that to say, Bill C-11, it was rushed through the House of Commons. It was forcefully pushed through committee, and then it was voted on. And so it did not, there was not rigorous debate that took place. There was not enough time put on hearing from witnesses or looking at each line of the bill in what's called clause by clause consideration. Instead, it was rammed through. What this does then is, of course, it puts the bill now in the hands of the Senate. And it will be up to the Senate to determine whether or not this bill gets to continue.
After the break, is Bitcoin being mined in Medicine Hat? The answer to that question is up next. For over 10 years, cryptocurrencies have been making headlines. We hear about the volatility of Bitcoin's price. Then there's the question of its use and origin. But would you believe Medicine Hat is a place to mine Bitcoin? Ryan Chernesky, Director of Modern Mining, joined Jeanette Rocher earlier this week to tell us more.
So your company, Modern Mining, that's what you do, right? You create cryptocurrency.
Correct. We're a Bitcoin miner based in Alberta, out of Medicine Hat. Yep.
Why did you choose Medicine Hat for a mining location?
So the Alberta electricity market, and electricity is our biggest expense in the business, is deregulated, but there are regulations in Alberta. So throughout most of Alberta, you have to pay transmission and distribution charges. Alberta allows municipalities to produce their own electricity. And what's unique about Medicine Hat is there are large gas fields in the area. So energy for Medicine Hat is produced through these through generators for these gas fields. And the transmission and distribution charges, which are one of our biggest expenses on the electricity cost side, is less expensive there. So, we worked with the municipality, businesses like ours, bring in jobs, and that's what municipalities want. So they've been wonderful to work with.
Yeah, definitely. So do you think Medicine Hat or maybe other parts of Southern Alberta could become kind of like a hub for this new kind of mining?
I think they could. Yeah, I think the Alberta government has a mandate to try to expand our business within Alberta beyond oil and gas. We're trying to diversify our electrical sector so that it's not reliant on fossil fuels. I think Bitcoin mining, one of the big utilities of it is that it can help to balance out electrical grids. So as we move towards more wind and solar, the sun always doesn't shine, the wind doesn't always blow. And so what energy providers have to do is they build those solar farms and wind farms much greater scale than they need to be, because on days when it's cloudy and not windy, you don't have as much energy. So if you put a Bitcoin miner on site, then when there's too much energy produced, windy days, sunny days, Bitcoin miners can use that energy because it's in abundance. When there's no wind and no sun, there's less energy produced. We need to, turn on our machines at home. Then the Bitcoin miners can shut down. There's more energy to go out to the grid. So instead of these highs and lows that you get, it tends to flatline the grid much more and keep the prices stable. So there's one of the real world utilities where power companies are starting to recognize that a fleet of Bitcoin miners on site monetizes that excess energy and helps to reduce prices and costs for you and I at home.
On the topic of Southern Alberta, of course, so one of the big topics of conversation in this region is orphan wells. So how is your company or maybe others helping with a solution to this?
That's a unique problem to Alberta. I mean, we're in oil and gas, and we know there's thousands of orphan wells out there that need to be remediated. Well, the government, the taxpayer, they don't want to pay for it. Industry doesn't want to pay for it, but yet you've got thousands of wells out there. To my knowledge, no one is doing this right now, but we would be absolutely open to using Bitcoin mining to monetize the energy that's on site. And one of the beauties with Bitcoin miners is they're very portable. So you can take them, move them all over. They can go to remote sites. You could utilize that energy, turn that energy into dollars, use those dollars to then remediate the site. Each well site, whether it's $10,000 or $1 million, depending on what's been done there in the past, that would be a way where the taxpayer wouldn't be on the hook. The private sector can solve a problem. We can help diversify Alberta's economy, and we can get some of this environmental problem cleaned up. I think it's a huge utility use case for Bitcoin, which honestly, it hasn't even been looked at very much at all. But I think in the future, it would be a great option. So we're about $1 trillion right now. It was up to 3 trillion at one point. So we're in a bear market right now. It's a little bit tougher in our industry, but the strong survive, and I think they'll come out much stronger as things tend to increase.
What do you think is the future of cryptocurrency?
I think Bitcoin, the granddaddy of them all, will be integrated to, like I said, orphan wells to help that. It'll get integrated into industry, greenhouses, for example. If you want to grow food more locally and not import it from Mexico and California, long ways away, you could grow it locally. Well, how about using the heat that Bitcoin miners produce to heat greenhouses and reduce the cost there? So I think there's a great opportunity to localize things in terms of food growth production using Bitcoin miners as a heat source. So I think there's a great future ahead of it.
After the break, the co-founder of Streets Alive mission sheds some light on the tent cities popping up in Lethbridge. That's coming up next. While Albertans get ready for the Pope's first stop in Edmonton on his reconciliation trip, homeless encampments have become an issue in many Canadian cities, including here in Lethbridge. We have been sharing the stories and issues with you here. But what, if any, are some possible solutions? Earlier this week, Jeanette Roche sat down with Ken Kissick, one of the co-founders of Streets Alive mission in Lethbridge. He shared with her what he sees as a path forward.
Ken, what kinds of problems typically arise when we see homeless encampments set up in various areas around the city?
I think one of the things to remember is that this year encampments seem to be on the increase, and they are. But really, that's a big community problem. And one of the things that we fail to realize with Lethbridge, we talk about the city of 100,000 people, but really our business draw is 400,000 people. And so we have those kinds of problems. Now, encampments, obviously, things that happen with them is you see an increase in crime. You're going to see an increase in needle debris and some of the behaviors that come with it. But again, we're dealing with a population that has no place to go, and so they are simply living rough.
That's putting it mildly. Absolutely. Now, Ken, are the majority of people who stay in these encampments, are they struggling with addictions, or are they also individuals who are sober, but simply maybe have nowhere else to go? What are you finding?
There is a portion, the large portion of them are addicted. There's no question about it. There is a percentage of those people that are not highly addicted or not addicted, but they actually choose to be in the encampments for whatever reason. Could be safety. They may, whatever it is, there might be some mental health issues, those kinds of things. So it's not that they don't have a place to go, they choose not to go.
Also, I would imagine that they might feel like that's their own little space too, that's away from others.
Well, absolutely. Sleeping rough, we've always had sleeping rough. And those people that choose to do that, choose to do it largely because they feel safer on their own. But there are other reasons. So, for example, the shelter, which tries to do its best, but you can't take your stuff into the shelter. You can't take your pet into the shelter. If you're a couple, you can't go into the shelter and be together. You have to be divided. So there are other reasons that they choose not to use the shelter or other places. And we have no other affordable housing or any kind of social housing to put them in.
Well, it kind of makes sense then why they would rather just be in a tent, I absolutely understand.
It's not ideal, and it's
Right.
not necessarily their first choice.
For sure.
It's just a choice that they are left with.
Absolutely. So now, Ken, when the city takes down these tent cities, where do the people end up spending the night?
Well, first of all, there's a kind of a misunderstanding that when the city uh, disperses a tent city, they take all their stuff. They don't, because it's their stuff. The city can't take away their tent, can't take away their tarps. But they basically come in and say, look, you can't be here anymore. You need to move along. And so the people just disperse and set up in other locations.
Some are advocating for the city to set up temporary shelters on city land. So what do you see as being some of the pros and cons of this?
The pros to having a location where they can go to are that generally then you will have that at-rough population kind of in one area. So for monitoring them and working with them, it's a little easier than we have now where we've got to go to 6 or 7 different sites. However, when you congregate them, your crime goes up, and crime includes things like sexual assault, abuse, violence. You had the issue with the shooting. So you got more people in one area, you're going to have more tension. The unfortunate part of it is some people just want them to go away. Don't let them in town. That's not a solution. Okay. The solution is to begin asking ourselves the questions of why do we have encampments, and then if we understand why we have them, then okay, that's fixed the problem.
Coming up next, a severe storm slammed the Medicine Hat area, tearing off roofs and leaving thousands without power.
I dove into the bathtub in my bathroom and the entire roof of my house ripped off. It was about 10 seconds. I was just in the bathtub with zero electricity covering my head.
Earlier this week, the big news in our province was the storm that hit Medicine Hat, Redcliffe, and Cypress County hard. Although not officially categorized as a tornado, there were reports of one touching down. Trees were damaged and power lines went down. City officials said at one point 5,600 customers were without power in Medicine Hat, Cypress County, and Redcliffe. Some properties south of the Hat were hit the hardest and were badly damaged during the storm. BCN's Jeanette Rocher was in Medicine Hat on Tuesday and filed this report.
Rex Olson points out where the porch and deck of his parents' house used to be.
This is what was my room.
In fact, all the buildings on the family's property have been destroyed.
A house, a shop, another smaller art studio, 4 other outbuildings, and a greenhouse. All gone.
My entire yard's trashed. My shop is now in my backyard. All of my dad's tools and all my motorbikes and dirt bikes were in it. And my trampoline's up my fence line.
The 13-year-old was home alone with his cousin when the house started shaking.
Every window in the house broke. The entire house was shaking on its foundation, I guess. The door slammed on my wrist. It's hurt. I dove into the bathtub in my bathroom and the entire roof of my house ripped off.
He says it all happened so fast.
It was about 10 seconds. I was just in the bathtub with zero electricity covering my head.
So I was at work, and my wife called me in a complete panic.
She didn't know if I was alive or not.
And across the street from the Olsons' property, more damage, homes missing roofs.
Many homes off of Wholesome Road here in Cypress County have undergone damage. Behind me, a mobile home completely flipped over. The owner has lost part of his house and has a collection of classic cars that have been damaged.
Take a drive down the street, you see downed trees and debris. In town, at least 71 electrical poles were down.
However, in the coming days, we'll likely find more.
And as of Tuesday, still about 100 homes without power. The city and county calling this a wind or severe weather event. Although there are unconfirmed reports that this was a tornado, Medicine Hat officials are not using the T word.
Because I'm not a
expert in this, and this is where we truly do rely on those experts to be able to provide us with that information.
Winds were reported at the airport from our sensor at 93 kilometers per hour, but there was a storm chaser that had a handheld measuring device that reported a gust of up to 135 kilometers an hour, and some of the damage that we've seen to the west of the city is consistent with wind speeds even higher than that. And so what we're now currently investigating is whether or not there could have been a tornado that was embedded within this system.
But regardless of how it's being classified, those who were left in the storm's way are now dealing with its aftermath.
No one expects this, but we will rebuild.
For Bridge City News, I'm Jeanette Roche.
The nasty Alberta storm also impacted crops for many producers in our region due to the amount of hail we received. Lethbridge County Reeve Tory Campbell says farmers are surveying the damage to determine next steps. He says resources are available to those who are experiencing extreme stress right now. Campbell says to call the Alberta Mental Health Hotline provided by the province. He says mental health supports are also available online by visiting domore.ag. Lethbridge is lending a helping hand to the city of Medicine Hat following the devastating thunderstorm that took place earlier this week. More than 7,500 people were without power. A Lethbridge city official says they have always had a good working relationship with Medicine Hat and did not hesitate to help when asked by the head of the utility department there.
We always have been helping each other out when in need, whether that's materials and shortage of things just in regular day-to-day activities. We did go a few years ago, and I sent a couple crews a few years ago in a windstorm and helped them restore them as well.
As of Tuesday, Lethbridge sent a crew of 5 personnel with 4 vehicles to Medicine Hat to help with the aftermath. It feels like kids only just got out of school, but already preparations need to be made for them to go back. The 2022 Back to School, Ready, Set, Go, and Stuff the Bus campaign is now underway. It is a joint venture with the Interfaith Food Bank Society of Lethbridge and My City Care, along with local agencies. This year, the food bank will focus on recruiting healthy back-to-school snack items, along with essential school supplies.
We're just starting our recruitment now. We're expecting to serve about 1,500 kids this year. Last year we did over 1,300. And basically what we're asking is for the community to pick up a few extra school supplies and healthy back-to-school lunch items when they're out shopping for their own families. They will come from all walks of life, but all school-aged children need supplies of some kind, whether that's backpacks and pencil crayons, or if it's lunch kits and fruit cups.
School supply donations for Ready, Set, Go can be dropped off at either local food bank, YMCA, or My City Care, and community members are encouraged to donate. Tent encampments continue to be an issue in cities across Canada, and you can include Lethbridge on that list. Coming up next, a special feature on Lethbridge's growing tent cities.